Right, now to our next guest. Tim Moulton is one of the world's leading experts on the Titanic and joins us live now on the programme. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. We are all around the world clearly just absorbing this news. Your thoughts right now?
Well, it's just incredibly devastating. We were hoping for a miracle, and obviously that hasn't transpired. My only glimmer of something positive to say about this is for those 5 brave men, their deaths would have been instantaneous. And that is better than 100 hours of starving of oxygen. So that's the only glimmer of hope. But this shouldn't be allowed to happen again. We need to make sure that submersibles which carry fee-paying passengers are super safe and properly tested down to greater depths than they need to experience.
And so let's explore that, because we were talking about the unprecedented nature of this. It's not even quite clear who will investigate what in this situation, where other kind of disasters like this is very clear who carries out the investigation. Is that a sign that maybe something else should have been done before a disaster like this?
Well, obviously, with hindsight, it's very easy to say that. So yes, it should have been. But I think it's quite difficult. The subs which found the Titanic in 1985 were US Navy subs, including assistance from the French Navy. Then we've had, for example, James Cameron in 1997 diving on the wreck using Russian subs as well. And what we've got there is state-sponsored equipment. And then what we have here is rather different. The Ocean Gate was a commercial enterprise which didn't have state-backed funding. And I think that possibly the equipment was not quite as good as some of the other equipment was.
I see. Given the risks, given the extraordinary depth at which this all takes place, it is a testament to the power of the Titanic and the story of the Titanic and people's extraordinary enthusiasm for it still all these years on.
Oh, that's absolutely right. The sort of people who died originally on Titanic 111 years ago, those 1,500 souls, they sort of almost represent humankind, if you like. And the iceberg really represents the awesome power of nature, the kind of forces that we're witnessing today that just crushed that sub in an instant. And so really the Titanic tragedy speaks to the human condition.
And do you think these kind of expeditions, these kind of missions now, we're talking about a need for clearly an investigation. Is there a case now that they should be stopped completely for tourists, for adventurers, just be left to researchers and experts, if at all?
I think they should certainly be suspended until the lessons are learned. If pieces from the submersible can be recovered, then we could perhaps learn where the fault lines occurred and what was the structural problems. But I imagine that many technicians around the globe who specialize in this sort of thing will be aware of perhaps the structural problems with that high pressure cell, which failed, it seems. So what I think we should do is suspend tourist deep sea diving, certainly to the Titanic, until all the lessons are learned. And we need to make sure that any vessels that go down there carrying fee-paying passengers, I'm not talking about scientists or military operations, but for fare-paying passengers, they need to be certified to greater depths than they will be put through.
Tim Moulton, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and your expertise. Thank you for talking to us. Okay, just want to quickly recap now some of the elements that we have discovered out of the press conference just in the last hour. If you are joining us, we did learn just shortly before the press conference of the deaths of the 5 on board. But after the press conference started and after the statement, journalists were allowed to ask questions, and we did find out some more details as a result of those questions. We learned about 5 different major pieces of the sub being discovered. We learned more about their location. We knew from this afternoon that actually they were discovered in the region of the Titanic itself, but we got a bit more detail on that. 1,600 feet away. So the question was asked, was this potentially a collision with the wreckage of the Titanic or an implosion elsewhere? And the answer seemed to be fairly conclusive, that the area in which the wreckage of this sub, the Titan sub, was found was not an area with Titanic wreckage in it, hundreds of meters away. So that gives some idea potentially of when this implosion, this catastrophic implosion happened, certainly not at the depths and interacting with the wreck of the Titanic itself. It would appear, I said certainly there, clearly it isn't certain at the moment, but certainly the impression given was that actually this was not a case of a collision, because the wreckage was just a few hundred meters away from the site of the actual Titanic. Other questions about the timeline. Clearly, the sub went down on Sunday. When did this catastrophic implosion take place? Well, we don't have exact timings on that, but there was one clue, and that was that there was no sound of an catastrophic implosion after the search operation was underway. So those sound detectors, buoys in the water, they would have picked up that implosion if it had happened sometime in the last couple of days, which suggests the catastrophic implosion happened before all that technology and search and rescue operation was in place. And a rather grim question was asked, but one very important to the families, of course, which is about the recovery of the bodies. And it was simply that they did not have an answer for that, but the very nature of catastrophic implosions like this, one would imagine, means that is a very difficult issue and a very difficult question to answer. So those were some of the main new points that we learned from questions after that press conference, as I said, in the last 45 minutes or so.